Good morning to all of the schools who have joined us and can see this presentation. As you are getting ready, classrooms, for the next 45 minutes, I am going to post a slide here. We would like for you to tell us that you are here in the conference. And so we want you to go to todaysmeet.com/PPSP 2012. Oh, no W's in front. Okay, I'll make that change real quick. No www, just todaysmeet.com/PPSP 2012. Please just log on with your school name and give us your school and the name of your teacher. And while you're doing that, I'm going to correct my slide because I want everybody to make sure they have the correct information. Very good. We will get started in about 2 more minutes. So schools, we're so glad to have you here. Please log on to todaysmeet.com/PPSP 2012. Give us the name, log on with your school name, and give us the name of your teacher. I need to see the chat. You can't do it. I need to see the technical chat.
Unified conferencing.
Good morning. Could you please make sure your microphones are muted? This is the Presidential Primary Sources Project, and we are so happy to have schools join us today. Oh, we have a school from Boise, Idaho. Wonderful. Again, schools, as you join this conference, please go to the website todaysmeet.com/PPSP 2012 and let us know you are with us today. We will be starting in the next minute. Okay, good morning. I see we must have an open mic. We are so happy to have all the schools join us for the Presidential Primary Sources Project and the presentation by the George Bush 41 Library. Schools, as you join us this morning, please sign in to todaysmeet.com PPSP 2012 to let us know you are with us today. It looks like Idaho is the first to tell us they are here. I know we have many Texas schools, so please, and North Dakota. North Dakota has also joined us.
Welcome to Unified Conferencing.
Please join us. Tell us you're here. Log on to todaysmeet.com. And with that, we will get started. Good morning.
Could we have
My name is Carol Willis.
address in?
You're on. And next to me, who wants to remain off camera, is another Carol Titleman. We are located in Austin, Texas, and we are part of the group that is presenting today the Presidential Primary Sources Project. So for those of you that are joining us and have not really heard about the project, very briefly, I will tell you, and I'm going to switch to my next slide, that this project is a group effort. And it is a group effort by 3 big groups. I'm going to ask that everybody make sure their microphones are muted. And if you have a cell phone, it must be off. That weird noise you hear is probably somebody's cell phone. And you can't mute them. The cell phone has to be off. Anyway, the 3 big groups sponsoring this project are the U.S. Presidential Libraries, the U.S. National Parks, and a group of collaborators from the Internet 2K20 initiative. The goal of this project is to engage you, the classrooms, throughout the nation and throughout the international education community with the overarching theme of democracy. And the main purpose for this project is around democracy and using primary source documents for student research and presentation. This is the first of a series of presentations by our U.S. Presidential Libraries and National Parks. You can see here we have 5 other presentations upcoming in the next 2 months. So we hope you will be there to join us. And today with that, I'm going to turn the program over to Dr. Shirley Hammond, who is the Director of Education at the George Bush Presidential Library and Museum, otherwise known as Bush 41, and she can explain where 41 comes from. So Shirley, I'm going to turn this over to you. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Carol. Welcome. We're so glad you're all here with us today. Thanks for joining us to learn about primary sources at the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library and Museum. We are located in College Station, Texas, on the campus of Texas A&M University. Significant changes happened to expand global democracy while George Herbert Walker Bush served as the 41st president. His term of office was from January of 1989 to January of 1993. So let's begin by defining democracy. According to Webster's Dictionary, we define it as government exercised either directly by the people or through elected representatives. Also, it is social equality and respect for the individual within the community. Thus, it is freedom given to each individual to pursue happiness, to have equality, and to have the right to vote in elections. We take our democratic way of life for granted, but sadly, there are many people in the world who do not have the rights of democratic freedom. A major Bush Museum primary source artifact is the 2.5-ton piece of the Berlin Wall. It was presented to President Bush on behalf of the German people in 1993 to commemorate his role in support of the pro-democracy movements in Eastern European countries. During the 4 years of President Bush's 41st administration, a major stimulus for democratic change followed the fall of the Berlin Wall on November 9, 1989. This happened in the countries that had been denied citizens' rights to vote and democratic exercises. The wall was a primary Cold War symbol, so thus its dismantling brought the end of a divided Germany and the collapse of communism in Europe. The East German government had built the Berlin Wall in 1961 to keep their citizens from fleeing to democratic freedom in the West. So now, in looking at the wall section on the screen, the left photo of the wall has words on it. Can you read any of the words? Now compare that side of the wall to the right side photo of the wall section. How would you describe this side of the wall? So let's make another comparison between which side was located in the West and which in East Germany. Raise your hand if you think the right photo of the clean wall side represents free democratic people. Now, raise your hand if you think the left photo of the wall with the words on it represents free democratic people. If you just raised your hand, then you are correct. For 28 years, the Berlin Wall was a concrete and steel wall topped with barbed wire, which surrounded the western sector of occupied Berlin, and it was over 100 miles long. By 1988, a year before the wall fell, 84% of the West Germans had no contact with East Germans, and this was because the East German government did not permit its people the right to travel, and it also restricted their communication with the West. So now we're going to go from our museum exhibit to the Bush Presidential Archives, and we're going to bring history alive by learning what leaders of other countries were thinking in the months prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall. We want to consider what was the role of diplomacy. How did diplomacy help to change attitudes and generate support of new pro-democracy movements in Eastern Europe? So we're going to show the photo of Chancellor Kohl of West Germany. He is the gentleman who is on the right, closest to the edge of the wall. Vice President Bush, and the gentleman beside him on the other side is the mayor of West Berlin. They are looking from the Democratic side into East German no man's zone. And it was in this zone where around 200 Germans were killed when they tried to flee to the West. George H.W. Bush was the vice president and for 8 years, and he represented the United States at meetings overseas. But at these meetings then, he became friends with many leaders prior to becoming president. So the first document that we're going to take from our archives is a memorandum of a telephone conversation. And you always want to look then at the date. It's a call from President Bush to Chancellor Kohl. So the date was January 23rd, 1989. The place is the Oval Office, and it was a 5-minute call. In this memorandum of the telephone conversation, we see that President Bush told Chancellor Kohl this was the first call he was placing because he wanted to thank the Chancellor for the very warm message of congratulations. And just 3 days before, President Bush had been inaugurated as president on January 20th. So this emphasizes to us the importance of friendship between these leaders. The Chancellor replied that he hoped that they could handle matters like this in the future. He said, just call when no urgent matters are at hand. And think about it. This is how friends handle good relations, by staying in touch. Also, the president told him that he knew the chancellor was opposed to chemical weapons, and the president was outraged by negative press coverage in the United States about the chancellor on this matter. So again, he's showing the bond of friendships between the two of them. Now, they've had many phone conversations that followed, and we're going to skip quite a few of their phone conversations and look at the second document, which is a memorandum of a telephone conversation over 3 months later. And it took place, again, we look at the dates, it took place on May 5th, 1989. It turns out it was an 18-minute call. And again, it's the president calling from the Oval Office at the White House in Washington, D.C. The memorandum goes on with the chancellor talking, and he says, "We are in a historic position. History is being made because we have been witnessing events beyond our wildest dreams. The ideological breakdown of a political and economic system." The chancellor said, "This was the hour of our triumph." He urges the president to visit Poland and Hungary to observe an enormous evolution there. The president said he did feel it was appropriate for him to show his support for the changes in Eastern Europe. The chancellor said it was important and necessary for the president to go to Eastern Europe. He strongly encouraged this. He said there were great expectations in those countries about these visits, and he added that he, the chancellor, was going to follow the president's visits too. So again, we have that friendship of support. The chancellor said we should make the best possible use of this opportunity. So again, he's encouraging his friend, the president, to seize the moment to show support to the people of Poland and Hungary, because those people were generating democratic changes. Now we're going to go, almost a month later, June 1st, 1989, President Bush is in London, England, and he's visiting Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher of Great Britain because she was also very important as a key leader involved in the decision-making process of this evolution to greater democratic change in Europe. Document 3 then is a question and answer session with the press in London involving Prime Minister Thatcher and President Bush, again on June 1st. So in this exchange to the press, the president reaffirms that there is a special relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States. But also he points out there's a long friendship that he and Prime Minister Thatcher have had, and again it was due to his 8 years in the vice presidency. President Bush underscores in his remarks regarding Eastern Europe that the United Kingdom and Prime Minister Thatcher will be able to influence and encourage the trend to democracy. And this is because the UK is widely respected in Eastern Europe. So our next photo is a little over a month later, and here we are in Gdańsk, Poland. It's on July 11th, 1989. President Bush is with the Solidarity leader, Lech Walesa, and Mrs. Bush. And you can see the crowds of people there in Gdańsk cheering. They've both spoken to these crowds. I just want to point out that Lech Walesa founded the first non-communist trade union, Solidarity, and there were 9.5 million members, or 1/3 of the total working age population in Poland had joined Solidarity. Also, in 1983, Lech Walesa received the Nobel Peace Prize, and later in history, from 1990 to 1995, he will become the first president of Poland. So this time we're going to turn to the primary source book which was written by President Bush and Brent Scowcroft, and it's called A World Transformed. This was written using their daily journals, so there's authentic accuracy of the events and of their thoughts at the time. From his journal, President Bush points out that he had the heady sense of witnessing history being made on the spot. As the leaders of the Polish communist regime and Solidarity, headed by Lech Walesa, came together. He said it was a miracle how far Poland had come since he had been there 2 years before. President Bush was convinced that the people's desire for freedom was powerful and irreversible, and that the country would not willingly revert to Soviet domination. President Bush believed that the Polish patriotic leaders deeply wanted what was best for Poland. So he also said this is due also to the fact that Chairman Gorbachev of the Soviet Union had indicated to Poland the Soviets would not intervene. Thus, Poland had the leeway to go down a new path, and that would be a democratic path. The next photo then is 5 days after the fall of the Berlin Wall. It's on November 14th, 1989. And here's the Polish Solidarity leader, Lech Walesa, and he's meeting with President Bush in the residence of the White House in Washington, D.C. So we know that there is a bright future ahead for Mr. Walesa and the Polish people. The final photo then is the Malta Summit on December 2nd, 1989. This is very important. It was a very important summit between President Bush and Chairman Gorbachev. Again, our topic is the expansion of global democracy following the fall of the Berlin Wall. And this very important summit is going to highlight the changes that indeed are being made. Less than a month after the fall of the Berlin Wall, President Bush and Chairman Gorbachev of the Soviet Union then met in the harbor of Malta. They were aboard a ship, the Maxim Gorky. There was a question and answer session on December 3rd, 1989, and this is our final document from the Bush archives. The discussions included, as President Bush said, quote, amazing changes that I have witnessed in Poland and in Hungary, hopeful changes. They led me to believe that it was time to sit down with Chairman Gorbachev face to face to see what he and I could do to seize the opportunities before us. There is reaffirmation between Bush and Gorbachev that they gained a deeper understanding of each other's views and a cooperative U.S.-Soviet relationship to make the future safer and brighter. To the question, do you think the Cold War has been ended now that the Berlin Wall has fallen? Chairman Gorbachev said, we stated, both of us, that the world leaves one epoch of Cold War and enters another epoch. We're just at the very beginning of our road, long road, to a long-lasting, peaceful period. Gorbachev affirmed that many Cold War characteristics should be abandoned, such as arms race, mistrust, psychological and ideological struggle. All that should be things of the past. On page 8, Chairman Gorbachev says in answer to a Czechoslovak journalist's question that the Soviet Union will not intervene in Eastern Europe militarily as had happened in the past. To quote him, he said, every nation is an independent entity in world politics, and every people has the right to choose its own destiny, the destiny of its own state. he says, and this is a quote, "And I can only explain that this is my own attitude." But then he continued, "I believe that those changes, both in the Soviet Union and in the countries of Eastern Europe, have been prepared by the course of the historic evolution itself. It," and he goes on to say, "is a reciprocal movement so that the people will become more close around the continent and preserving at the same time the identity of one's own people." This is very important for us to understand. Chairman Gorbachev stated, and again you see this relationship, this friendship coming out, "I share the view of the president that personal contacts are a very important element in the relations between leaders of state, the more so because we are talking about the leaders of such countries as the United States and the Soviet Union. And I welcome those personal relations." So we again emphasize the friendship that existed between the foreign leaders of the world and the importance of their ability to meet together and talk together and resolve major issues in the world. This is the final impressive statement by Chairman Gorbachev, which reiterated the importance of his personal relationship with President Bush. And again, he said, for the good of the interests of the entire world community. So now, since your Presidential Primary Sources Project is a student teaching students, we want to introduce at this time Jessalyn Welsh and Cody Welsh. They actually won the Junior Division of the National History Day with their Fall of the Berlin Wall exhibit. So at this time, we're going to hear from Cody Welsh.
Dr. Hammond, it's Carol Willis, and I know we have some schools that have joined us, and they probably have questions. So if I could just take a second and remind schools, if you have a question, please log on to todaysmeet.com/PPSP2012 and put your school name, and then feel free to ask your question. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Cody Welch, and I'm going to be talking to you today about primary sources and how we use them in a project that we did a couple of years ago. I first want to start off by thanking Dr. Hammond and the George Bush Library for sponsoring this event and hosting it and letting me and my sister be a part of this event. It's just a really great honor for me and my sister to be a part of this whole event today. So I'll start off with talking about primary sources and how we use them and how we got a hold of them. And one important thing about primary sources is one thing typically leads to another. And so we would get a lot of sources from secondary sources, like reading books and articles, and they would have names in them, and we would eventually use those names and try to find out how to contact these people, which normally the books and sources would help us. And we would get those sources and contact the people and get a hold of some really incredible people and artifacts, which I'm going to show to you today. And so one of my favorite sources that we found, and it was just an incredible honor to do it, was talking to Dr. Sergei Krushchev, who is the son of Nikita Khrushchev, who was instrumental in putting up the Berlin Wall in the first place. But Sergei Khrushchev wanted the wall down when he became older, and was instrumental in also bringing down the wall as well. But how we got a hold of him was by Ms. Susan Law, who helped us with a lot of our research. And she told us about Sergei Khrushchev and said that he was very willing to work with students and adults to research about the Berlin Wall. And so we contacted him during through an email, and we were able to correspond with him that way for the first couple of days. He emailed us back saying that we could have an interview with him by phone and we could also record him. And so that's what we did. And it's very important when you're interviewing someone to always plan ahead, make sure you write out your questions and that you're able to have the interview process go smoothly. And so we were able to get some really great information from Dr. Sergei Krushchev, and it was just really an incredible experience. And so the next thing we used is actual photos, which truly speak 1,000 words, as the saying goes. And so one of these photos was from Life magazine, which you can normally get these type of magazines from your local library or your presidential archives. And amazingly enough, we found this actually on eBay, which is another really great way to find primary sources. Life magazine, even though it has both secondary and primary sources, they can still have incredible primary sources such as still photos, like this man taking a child underneath the Berlin Wall, and it just really captures a moment in history. So another thing that we found during our search for primary sources were actual pieces of the Berlin Wall. These were actually given to us by Winston College in Westminster College in Missouri, and we were researching Winston Churchill there because they had an exhibit on the Berlin Wall and about Winston Churchill, who made a famous speech about the Iron Curtain at the Berlin Wall. And while we were researching, they asked us if we actually had pieces of the Berlin Wall, and we said we didn't. And amazingly enough, a week later, once we got home, they sent us these 2 pieces of the Berlin Wall, which just really have an amazing impact on how real the history, actual pieces of the Berlin Wall that can be used as great primary sources. And as I said before, it's just one thing typically leads to another, and you're able to use those, and it's just really incredible. And then the last thing are actual video clips. And this is pretty old school, but VCR tape. And we actually got this from Houston television station from a reporter, Ron Stone, a news anchorman for Channel 2 News in Houston back in 1989. He was actually there when the Berlin Wall fell down, and we were able to find this out from an interview we had with him by email. And again, it was just another great opportunity. Even though we didn't get to speak to him in person, it was just a great way for us to communicate with him. And he gave us a link to a clip of him talking about the actual experience of the Berlin Wall and what it was like being there the night it fell, which is also on a video clip, which we'll show later on. And the overall impression of primary sources and the lasting impact it has on me is incredible. I learned so much about the Berlin Wall through these primary sources. And one of the important things about primary sources that you should always think about, and it's always important to interview these people, is these artifacts, some of them like, paper and even people, they don't last forever. And it's really important to take advantage of opportunities that you have now. Interviews, though they can be a little bit nerve-wracking the first few times, as it was for me, once you get used to it and you get talking with a person, it really becomes an enjoyable experience, an experience that's once in a lifetime. An example would be Ron Stone. We emailed him, and we were able to talk to him by email for a couple of emails, but then only a year later he passed away. And it just really gave me a reason that these people and places and artifacts, they don't last forever. And it's really important that we try to take advantage of the time that we have now to talk to these people and use primary sources as the most effective way that we can use them. And that is probably one of the most important things with using primary sources.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce Jessalyn Welsh.
Hello, and I want to thank Dr. Hammond and the National Archives for giving me this wonderful opportunity to talk to you all. And like my brother Cody said, there are so many primary sources you can use. One of my favorite ones to use were interviews. You just got to hear one-on-one from the people who were actually there. And an example of this is Gail Halverson, the candy bomber. He gave us this book, and we got to interview with him. And as he was talking, he was explaining about witnessing this wedding. One of the West Berliners, they got married, and they were waving to their family on the east side. And I had realized I had seen a picture of this in a book that we had gotten, and it really just captured my emotions, because I couldn't imagine being separated from my family when I was having a wedding. Weddings are very important, and it just made a lasting impact on me. And some other photos that we saw were a soldier. He was jumping over the barbed wire fence before it actually became a wall. And it just showed how emotional this was, because even the soldiers didn't like the idea of being separated. So he wanted to get over to the other side before it was too late. And this next picture on the right is of a mother and daughter separated by the Iron Curtain that was being established. It was built in kind of stages. So it was at first it was a wall of men. They just lined men up. And then next to it was some fences. And then finally it was the concrete wall that separated East and West Berlin. And it's just so neat how these primary photos and interviews leave such an impact. And it just captures your emotions, and it feels very personal. Another one of my favorite primary sources, one of my favorite primary sources is using audio. And you can use those from speeches. We used some of ours from presidents and anchormen. And it's just really neat to actually hear from that time in history when they were talking about the wall while it was being put up. And so Cody and I used a program called Audacity, and we put together some of the clips and put some background music with it, and we played that for our exhibit. And so today we are going to show you that audio that we put together. And we also put together some of our photos from our exhibit, so that way you can kind of get a little taste for what it was like.
Listen, can you hear voices of tragedy and triumph? Listen, can you hear voices of tragedy and triumph? Winston Churchill, 1946.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent.
Berlin, 1961.
Platoons of People's Police in their ink blue uniforms in every subway and train station, barring the way to the platforms of trains that used to run to West Berlin. Groups of young men and women arguing with militiamen over their rights to pass down certain streets that have been sealed off. East Berlin is an armed camp.
President Kennedy, 1963.
While the wall is the most obvious and vivid demonstration of the failures of the communist system, for it is an offense not only against history, but an offense against humanity, separating families and dividing a people who wish to be joined together.
President Reagan, 1987.
In the communist world, we see failure, technological backwardness, declining standards of health, too little food. Even today, the Soviet Union still cannot feed itself. Freedom leads to prosperity. Freedom replaces the ancient hatreds among nations with comity and peace. Freedom is the victor. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, If you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
The Wall Falls, 1989. President George H.W. Bush.
The last remnants of the wall remain. And they're at the heart of a free Berlin. A ragged monument in brick and barbed wire. Proof that no wall is ever strong enough to strangle the human spirit. That no wall can ever crush a nation's soul.
Former anchorman Ron Stone.
That night I heard singing. They were singing a German version of an old Southern song from America's civil rights days. The kids were singing, "We Shall Overcome." I can still smell that night. I can still feel it. I will never forget it as long as I live. I saw history being made.
I hope that really encourages you to explore your primary sources, whether that be presidential archives or even the National Archives. This is just, it's so neat to all of these sources. And so whether that's researching a topic that you just really enjoy or a project, just explore all of those primary sources around you and just soak them in.
Thank you so much, Jessalyn and Cody. We really appreciate that you took time to share your primary sources research project. And also we want to congratulate you on your great success. That's wonderful.
Thank you so much.
And now we would like again to go to our museum. We're going to return to the museum. In the museum we have authentic footage of the Berlin Wall and activities that happened there that we want to share with you at this time.
I think you're right. It does say Tennessee. That's probably what it is.
glad that you were able to be with us today. We look forward to reading your posted questions, and we will be back in touch with you either through email or office hours. Again, thank you to Jesslyn and Cody Welsh. And I want to remind you to go to our website. There are many digitized primary sources on the Bush Library website that you can use for your projects. Stay in touch with us. Contact us if you have any other questions about this time and period when global democracy was expanded in Europe. And we hope that you have the best of luck and success in your own projects with the Presidential Primary Sources Project. Carol, thanks so much for everything you've done to make this project possible. You've worked so hard, and we really appreciate working with you. We're going to turn it back to Carol Willis.
Well, thank you. And I know our time is short, but we do have one question you probably have time to answer. Cody and Jocelyn, how did you know, did all of your sources come from the Presidential Library, or you uncovered and used some? And if you did uncover some that weren't validated through the Presidential Library, how did you know the sources you were using were authentic?
Well, not all of them did come from the Bush Library, but actually quite a few did. And that is what really made it helpful, was they just had so many that were so useful to us. And then the ones that didn't come, that were kind of like, they're almost like secondary, but yet they're still first primary sources, because like newspapers, they can be both primary and secondary, because maybe the author didn't, he wasn't there, or the writer who wrote the article, he wasn't there, but maybe he had a quote from the actual person who was there, or they had a photo from that particular moment in time. So you just have to do research and just make sure that you cite all your sources and that it's coming from the right place, and just making sure that everything's real accurate.
Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. And so you brought up a really good topic about knowing the difference between a primary source and a secondary source. So I'm sure as the students progress through this project, they will become more aware of the difference, and they too will learn how to validate the information that they're citing. So we loved the film that you and Cody produced. It was great. So thank you so much. I know our time is up. I'm gonna put one more time the place to go to send any questions you have for Dr. Hammond and the Bush Library. And we just appreciate your time that you spent with us today. So schools, be sure, so we can have it for our purposes, go ahead and log into today's meet and let us know that you were with us today, because we know we have a bunch of schools out there, and this is the only way we know you're with us. So thank you again, and thank you again to the Bush Library. Have a good day, everyone.